can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
We have, just as the year cruises to an end, we thought we'd get in, you suggested we speak to this gentleman, man.
I did.
Person. We've covered all bases there. I'm delighted to say we have sitting opposite me now a man called Richard Norton, who is, he's got a list of credentials and a CV as long as your arm. But he is an Australian, but he's worked extensively overseas. And let me just read out, and he'll correct most of this because that's what people do when I read most of their credentials out. He is he's in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. He's an actor, stunt coordinator, a security consultant, a fight choreographer. Now I don't know what any of this means. He's a 5th Dan black belt in Goju. I can see him looking at me, but he's going to explain what Goju is. He's a 6th Dan black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's an 8th Dan black belt in Chankukdo. He's ranked 6th in the US kickboxing. He's been a bodyguard for a list of celebrities, which we'll get to in a minute. He's familiar with the work and has worked with the great Chuck Norris. He's been intimately involved in Jackie Chan's movies, and he is not a quiet achiever because he's very well known, but he is a star, and he's going to join us here, and I hope we can make some sense of asking him some good questions about what he does in the film and entertainment industry. Welcome, Richard Norton.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sue.
I can say this because people can speak for my credentials and my gender, but he's an extremely good-looking rooster. And this
is true.
I would agree with that.
A very fit specimen, a very good-looking person, and I think you can say that about anyone these days, can't you?
Wow.
And you don't have to apologise for why you're saying it. So welcome to You Cannot Be Serious, Richard. Now tell me this. It says that you're 71, 2 or 3 or
74 in a week.
74.
Wow.
You look as a 12. You look as a 12. But surely you're not doing
intellectually, maybe.
Yes, that's the IQ.
You'll both get on well then.
That's right.
So I wouldn't think. I could be wrong. Are you still actively involved in doing stunts, or is a 73-year-old body not cut out for the work that you used to do?
Well, I'm more involved in fight coordinating now, which means I help put together the fights for the actors, train the actors, get them ready for whatever action they're going to have to do. But I'm not doing cast stunts or high falls or anything like that. In fact, my whole history is mainly in the fight action area. So whether I was acting or doing fight coordinating, stunt coordinating, that was sort of my little lane that I would stay in. I mean, there's tons of professionals that specialise in whether it's fire, burns or cars and crashes, and I leave that all to them.
So how exacting, and so when we go to the movies and we get go into a different world and we think, wow, he hit him over the head and wow, he did that and he punched him and he kicked him, how exacting is it to actually train people to make sure, A, they don't injure themselves or the people that they're meant to be doing the stunts against or with, and how much insurance is involved with the film studios and just how much safety? I noticed that the man who shot someone to death, what was his name? What was that bloke's name?
Yeah, on the film, on Rust, Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the gun went off. That was probably still an ongoing court case. I don't know about that, but how exacting is it to actually get it right?
No, it's very exacting, and what I would say about a lot of the stunts in reasonably budgeted movies, and I say reasonably budgeted because I think there's a lot of possibility of stuff going wrong when you don't have proper preparation. Like my job is to train an actor to be able to do a fight safely, but the biggest part is to make it look absolutely believable, but with no actual contact, within reason. if you're using the actors, and that takes a lot of work. It's why I say a lot of stunt people, it's why they get paid the big dollars. It's not easy to make a fight on screen, whether it's a barroom fight or a martial arts fight or something that you might see Scarlett Johansson do in one of the Marvel films. It's not easy to make it look real, and that's the job. And, you know, the camera has no sense of depth, so part of the instruction when you're training people is that I can put a punch and make it 6 inches away from you, providing the camera angle is correct, and the reaction to the punch is correct, and the punch is thrown with intent. Then hopefully we get something believable to the audience that are watching it. And it's true, there's a lot of insurance involved in everything else, but that's why they hire people like me that know the fight action to not only give the actor the confidence to know they can do it, but also, again, yes, to make sure that they're absolutely safe, especially when you have an actor fighting another actor. It's a little easier if they're fighting a professional stunt person, because that person's trained to almost expect that the actor is not going to do what the choreography dictates.
And the onus would be just as much on the person who's being aggrieved as in the person who's doing the punching. The person who's meant to be receiving the punch, the onus is on him as much to make it as realistic that he's been hit and fall down. And
it's actually more important than the actual punch.
Yes.
You know, the way the person sells the punches, we call it, they snap their head, the way they hit the ground like a sack of potatoes is very, very important to the believability of it. You know, because you could get, say, a smaller actress, you know, female throwing a punch that obviously wouldn't be able to maybe knock a 6'5" person on their butt. But providing that person, the 6'5" person, really sells and reacts, you do get to where you believe. Now, of course, it's a movie, you know, so we call it cinematic license. We're giving a license to the fact that this character is supposedly so well trained that they're able to sort of make anything work on a bigger person.
And you've worked on Asian films as well. So is there a difference between, say, Hong Kong cinema working with someone like Jackie Chan? Isn't there actual contact in some of those films?
Yeah, there is. You know, the first movie I ever did was 1984 with Jackie Chan. Mm-hmm. And I'm on the way over in the plane thinking, oh, this will be good, 10-hour days. Well, what a rude awakening it was for me. Because first of all, when the fight stuff starts, which is the whole focus of his movies, it's not about drama and talking heads so much as it is about the fight scenes that are usually quite long. But I was literally, and it's not an exaggeration, for the first fight I did with this gentleman, Sammo Hung, who's like the Steven Spielberg of Hong Kong movies. I was on the set 18 hours a day, 7 days a week doing that fight. And the contact, you know, he hit me with sidekicks that plastered me up against a wall. He's pretty much throwing him as hard as he can. And I even had to cop bare-fisted uppercuts under the chin because they put the camera in a way that you could not cheat it. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying, but if you put the camera over here, I can react a lot better if I don't think I'm going to get hit. No, you have to put the camera here. So they wanted to see the fist actually hitting my chin, and I found a little bit of cotton wool to put in my teeth because I didn't want to... And by the way, you're seeing the one take as the audience, but they were renowned then for doing 15, 20, 30 takes on one piece. So I'm copying this because I wanted to see my face contort in slow motion, you know, while he's hitting me. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I mean, this is a long time ago, and I was in pretty good shape, and I was okay with the contact, which is really the reason I got to do something like 5 movies with Jackie. It wasn't because I was better than anybody else, but they knew I would take the falls, take the bumps, would sort of zip it as it were.
Many Western actors might not do that. Well, some would come on set, I imagine, and think, what the hell, I'm getting the hell beaten out of me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other difference with Hong Kong movies as opposed to Western movies is there's virtually no script, meaning in a Western movie, say if you did Mad Max and you had a fight scene, you'd work the whole fight out and you would shoot a master, as they call it, and then you would go in and do coverage over the shoulder, certain inserts. With Hong Kong movies, after the first 3 or 4, they have no idea what the next moves are going to be. which in one way makes it very spontaneous. They can take it whatever direction they like, but you can't really prepare. So hence it takes so long, to actually shoot. So they'll just go and do a quick edit that night and figure out how long they want the fight to be and which direction they want it to go. But
what were some of the great fight scenes that you've done, and what are some of the movies that you've worked on?
No, probably the most complex are absolutely the Jackie Chan movies, because again, that's their thing, and they're not believable, of course. You get hit 49 times, in the space of 10 minutes, but you got to remember their audiences weren't so much about watching a film as though it's a documentary fight. It's all about the artistry. If you put a person on wires and they pull them up in the air and they throw 10 kicks in the air and everything, their sort of audience will applaud the complexity of that sort of fight. In fact, Jackie shared with me when I first got there, he has every silent movie like Buster Keaton and Laurel and Hardy and the Three Stooges, and he used to study the shtick of that. In other words, I read a review once of Jackie which hit it on the head for me. They said watching Jackie in a fight scene is like watching a speeding bullet in reverse. It's like him trying to get away from the bad guy, which is what someone like Charlie Chaplin used to do. And he'd use an umbrella or a ladder or whatever, props. Props are the huge thing with the Hong Kong movies. And so it was very comedic. And he said, I wanted the audience to be able to switch all the sound off, no dialogue, and still enjoy just the physicality of the fight scenes they do.
So you have a good relationship with Jackie Chan? Do you mix socially with him, or is it just strictly business? Would you say he's a friend of yours and a companion?
Yeah, I would say he's a friend, but it's been a long time since I've seen him. Jackie's long since now based in China. He's left the Hong Kong sort of...
is he your age? Well, how old is he?
Yeah, no, Jackie would be my age.
Yep.
I think he might be a year or two younger,
yep,
but I'm not sure. But he's still working non-stop. But we're friends. I was lucky, and I say lucky, that Samo and Jackie just really liked me. They took me shopping and went looking for cameras and restaurants and everything.
Well, Hong Kong's great, isn't it?
Yeah, but having said that, on set, it's all business.
Yep.
It's a bit, you hear about comedians like, is Robin Williams, he's probably funny all the time, but they're not funny all the time. That's what they do. That's their business. Do you know what I mean? And to get the so-called comedic side of a fight scene out is what they do, and he treats it incredibly serious.
So Richard Norton, we're speaking to, it's big business this. You, and this is a subtle way of asking you, are you well remunerated? Is this people like you get very well paid for doing this? Because it's what the show's about.
Yeah, yes and no.
Danger money.
I would say compared to what, not compared to the A-list actors and everything else. See, in the stunt world, you had the Screen Actors Guild as a union, and they have a set weekly salary, different for a stuntman than it is for a coordinator. You can get above that, but not often. Do you know what I mean? That's what you do.
Yep.
The difference for me is if I also act. I did a lot of acting in the lower budget movies and everything else. So that's a whole different pay structure and pay scale. But as far as the action world, no, it's pretty much determined by the unions and what they put down. And the reason they can do that is, yes, there's a lot of specialists that can get a little more, but it's a very competitive field. There's a lot of people who would love to be doing what I'm doing, which means, the old saying, nobody's indispensable,
You have to know what you're doing, obviously. It's obviously an area, if you make a mistake, you can have serious consequences, correct?
Yeah, no, and that's part of it. Most of the coordinators and even directors have a team, meaning people they've worked with that they know they can trust, they know they're going to look after the actor.
Yep.
And that's a common theme. They don't want to have to be sweating over who they've hired to do a fight or do an action piece or whatever.
And you were part of the new George Miller's Fury Road, which was considered one of the best action films of all time by critics in the last 10 years. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, that was incredible. First of all, a friend of mine, Guy Norris, who I've worked with for 30 years, he was involved in the very first Mad Max.
Oh, wow.
So he hired me on that, and I was thrilled to be part of such an iconic Australian action franchise was amazing.
Did you go to Namibia?
Namibia, yeah.
What was that like?
Filmed in a place called Swakopmund, which is like a German sort of colony, used to be very much down the south of Africa. And the reason we went there was supposed to be shot in Broken Hill. In fact, there were 6 weeks or whatever rehearsals. And they suddenly had unseasonable rains, so everything turned green, which didn't suit the post-apocalyptic world of George Miller. So suddenly all the vehicles and everything, which were all built from scratch, by the way, are put on ships and sent over to Africa. So off we went and we filmed in Namibia, which is incredible. You know, but I remember arriving in Swakopmund or whatever, and it looked like Alice Springs. And I thought, no wonder they want to shoot here, because you could drive 100 Ks in one direction, not see a tree.
Wow. And
their summer is weather, so that's why it was so suitable. And it was amazing, but hard. You know, your life in that shoot is in a tin can, which is a vehicle, because I played one of the characters in that film as well as doing the fight coordinating. And, you got dust storms and heat and everything else. I mean, people always look at films and, it must be so much fun. And you go, well, not so much, after the fact. When 10 months see the end result, it's good. But I've got to tell you, working with someone like George, George is like that lovely, sweet old uncle you wish you had. He's such a gentle man, but every frame of those films, including Furiosa, which we just finished.
And you were just involved in Furiosa.
Yeah, worked.
Can you reveal anything without George Miller coming over here to shoot you?
No, just that again. The story now. There's no Mad Max in this one.
Yes,
as you know,
there's no cameo from
Tom Hardy as Max, but now it's Anya Taylor-Joy, who was in The Queen's Gambit. It's a chess film. She's done a lot of stuff. She's playing the young Charlize Theron character.
And Chris Hemsworth, he seems to be a strange character.
Yeah.
Who does he play?
Strange.
Well, he looks bizarre. He looks like the villain, right?
Yeah, which is very cool. It's Chris is amazing. I've got to tell you, I'm allowed to swear on it, because I remember, I'd been on the film a couple of weeks, and my wife, Judy, I was on the phone to her. We were in Broken Hill or Hay. She said, have you met Chris yet? And I said, yeah, I met him a couple of weeks ago. Oh, what do you think? I said, fuck him. She's like, what do you mean, fuck him? I said, fuck him. He's 6'4". He's built like a brick shit house. Yeah. I said, he's even got perfect skin. And she's laughing. She said, you even noticed he had perfect skin. And he's a super, super nice guy and such a committed professional. Mm-hmm. Plus, he just sold his fitness app for something like, or involvement in for $200 million. So I said, fuck him, nobody deserves all of that. I said, I'll find something wrong with him, just give me a bit of time.
And that's your wife, Judy Green, she would be, Judy Green was...
Sailor to Century with Tony Barber.
No, she was, what else was she? Yeah. No, Albert Mangles.
You better tell us, it's your...
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah, Judy was on the first 6 years of Sailor to Century with Tony. Went away to the Amazon with L.B. Mangles to do the documentaries World Safari, which were huge. And they were in an accident, though. A bus hit the Jeep that Judy and the cameraman L.B. were in. Judy's head hit the dash. She ended up with 180-degree skull fractures, hematomas on the brain, stroke down the right side of her body, which a lot of people don't know, because the effects of that accident were covered up to some degree, due to all sorts of reasons I won't go into. So that sort of finished her celebrity career. She was, at one stage she was one of the most photographed models in Australia.
Yes, that's what I was getting at.
But I met, people get confused with Belinda Green, who I think was Miss Australia, but different. Yeah, but we've been together 37 years now.
Oh, great.
She's still beautiful, isn't she, though? She's a wonderful lady.
She's a fighter. Do you know what I mean? What she lost in that accident, you would never know. She will never moan about what she doesn't have. Her reading is almost like being dyslexic and everything, but she just gets on with stuff.
So that the stunt coordination and the fight choreographer is one part of what you do, and the other part, I presume, through reputation and people chatting and word of mouth. Are you security detailed to do security for celebrities?
Personal bodyguard.
Yeah, which entails just keeping the riffraff away from the. What does that entail?
You know, you
looking out for
everything. You know, you're basically. I used to laugh. It's almost becoming like the makeup artist on a movie set. You're kind of joined at the hip with the artist, so you get to know everything that goes on, everything they do, everything they like and don't like. And you're really there as a deterrent. Like, you know, I worked for 14 years with Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor, 8 years with David Bowie, Fleetwood Mac, ABBA, you know, security for their personal bodyguards. Yeah, and you're just there every time they go out to a restaurant or whatever, and obviously the gigs, you know, you're there. And you're there really to just, I used to say it's almost like that Alsatian dog, you know, that's there. Somebody will walk a little close, the ears prick up, they get a little closer, or start to growl. You're kind of like that, because my job is obviously the last thing that they would want me to do is punch a fan. Richard Norton. It wouldn't be Richard Norton punches a fan. It would be David Bowie's bodyguard punches a fan. So I was very aware that that's the last thing I could do. So my job was to go to a concert, basically suss out the crowd, who was sitting in the front rows, who's had too much to drink, get local security, keep a little more of an eye on them, and basically then I was the last line of defence. If a punter actually got on stage, that was my job to get them off, and to get them off in the most friendly manner possible.
Did they ever have anybody who was a bit of a worry? You know, maybe he was...
Incidents, Richard. Are any incidents that you can tell us about that we'd
Kill the hair.
Fascinated by?
Yeah, no, there were incidents, but not as many as one would think. You know, especially, you know, I worked in just about every city in the US with these artists, you know, and it's not so bad at a concert because I have all the local security to deal with. I can get them to work, tell them what I want, what that artist likes, and the way of people approaching, et cetera, et cetera. The shit really that can happen is when you go to a local club or local bar. Say you go with someone like David and you're in some little shit-kicking town in the US, you know, and all the local girlies are going all, you know, haywire.
That's like they go after Sam.
You know, and of course the local guys are like, oh, look at this, you know, fucking skinny little prick. Then I'm one out, then I've got to be a lot more careful. And there were situations you got to deal with, not so much with the average person that you can chat to. It's if somebody's out of their face on something or drunk or whatever. Typical things that would happen in a pub in Melbourne. That's when you got to be very careful. But you know, it's like we were in. I was with Stevie Nicks in a place near Florida, and we actually had FBI working with us because this guy had sent a telegram to then President Ronald Reagan saying he was basically going to, he said this cowboy's had his day, so it was a, you know, threat to kill him. The same guy had sent a letter to Stevie Nicks, you know, because I used to get any weird mail. Same thing, threatening her, so they're all there. By the way, when you know it's a real threat is when the guy sends his photograph and details about himself, you know he's really out of whack. And believe it or not, the FBI and that found this guy sitting in the second row of this concert and managed to recognise him and take him out of there. And that's sort of an indication of what the job's all about. You don't want it to get to the stage where he's actually front there standing with a gun. It's about that preemption of stuff like that. And same thing with Linda. You know, I used to live, you know, I was living at Linda Ronstadt's house in Malibu when I first went out for a while. And
what do you mean by that? No, you were living with Linda?
Yeah.
You went out with Linda Ronstadt?
Yeah.
No, that's all right. No, I was just...
Something I normally talk about. Yeah,
should I have known that?
Yeah.
Should I have known that? Is that well documented?
No. I've never put that out there. It's
when you say, I thought you might have had a room out the back somewhere so that you kept an eye on her security-wise, but you're actually going out with her.
Yeah, I went out with Linda for a year and a half or 2 years. You know, she was the reason I ended up in the States in the first place because
were the Stone Ponies there?
I did. That was before the Stone Ponies, but I did a tour with Linda in '78, and as a bodyguard, anyway, they left, and she wanted me to go and work for her full time in the US. And
I wouldn't wonder, Richard.
So there you go. But getting back to my
Is it
story,
like the film The Bodyguard with Kevin Costner? Is there a little bit of that going on?
You know, funny you mentioned that. I actually knew a makeup artist who was working on the Bodyguard movie. He invited me down to the set, and I'm standing there, and I hear this voice say, "Oh, Richard." I look over, and it's Kevin Costner calling out to me.
Wow.
I'm like, how the hell does he know who I
Nobody.
am? Well, cut to apparently he was going out with a friend of Linda's, ended up backstage. This is before he'd done much in the
Before
way
he was
that
famous,
made him somebody I would know. And because you got to have backstage pass and all this sort of stuff, I apparently kicked him out of the backstage area, which he remembered, you know. And we ended up having a conversation about the movie and Bodyguard. It was very much like that. I was working with Linda and ended up going out with it, all of that. So there were a lot of parallels. And he was asking me about the job and attitudes and all that sort of stuff. So,
And there was a sort of a companion movie to that called Someone to Watch Over Me with Tom Berenger,
That's
Yeah.
true.
who you look like
yeah,
a bit.
a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got sidetracked about Linda.
I'm still thinking about Linda Ronstadt, I think.
Yeah, and you know what? Just to put in, I still speak with Linda. You know, I just spoke with her a week ago. We talk on the phone, but you know, unfortunately, and I'm not giving away any secrets here because I wouldn't do that. But she's got it's not like it's like Parkinson's, you know, where she's like control of the nervous system and cannot even sing a note anymore.
Yeah, I think that's quite well documented. I think, yeah.
Which is tragic when you think of somebody who could sing operetta, rock and roll, country and western, and her whole life's passion is singing, to suddenly not be able to sing a note. And but her attitude is still great. She's like, I've had a fantastic life. I'm you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's very accepting of her lot in life. But
So you're sort of on call 24/7 if these celebs like Belushi or
John Belushi, I work with John.
Joey or if they want to go out to dinner with people, do you go to the restaurant and have a table up the back somewhere, or what do? Sit out the front in a car, or what?
No.
Keep an eye on them?
Well, it can be, depending, you know, a lot of security, that would be the case. But one of the reasons I got so much work with these bands and for so long is because I just look like a member of the band. Yeah. So it's not like this heavy sort of set overtures hanging around them. So we just became great friends. You know, an example like James Taylor, how long has he been around, for goodness sake? Mm-hmm. And I just got a text from James, coming to Australia in April, so looking forward to catching up.
Wow.
You know, and I thought, how good is that? I haven't seen James in quite a while, but it's those sort of relationships that come out of a job that are they're just precious.
And when he comes out, Richard, ask him to come in here and have a chat to us with you. In fact, we'll hand this over to you. You can do it and speak. You can interview him. So speaking about, you look like one of the band. You don't pack guns and knives. But what you do have is about 48, you have 5 fifth dan black. What is all that? How do you have a fifth dan black belt, 6th dan, 8th dan?
How did you first get into it?
What difference between a 5, 6 and 8th dan black belt?
They're just levels. It would probably be like playing football in high school, and then you go and play in junior leagues, and then you go to the actual league. You know, they're just levels of advancement in the art that a student gets as an indication of their improvement, and also the hierarchy. You know, a lot of martial arts systems are not unlike the military. In other words, you have a corporal and a colonel and a lieutenant, all these sorts of things, and it's important that in martial arts that you know who the teacher is and who the student is, know, and who basically gives the instruction and who helps the student on their journey. Look, but I would say a black belt is a black belt is a black belt. With the difference between 1st and 3rd and 5th and 6th, you know, it's. I would argue, there's probably different. Yeah, it's very subjective.
So, Richard, so the confidence of knowing that you could deal with not the average punter, but just about anyone who caused you grief within reason, like that is why it's so confident, having the confidence to deal with people, knowing that you could handle them and yourself without having to pull out a gun or a knife or bloody, I suppose, isn't it? It's the confidence knowing you can handle yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, which again, I would argue is probably another reason I did so much work, is because, again, they knew the last thing I would do is punch somebody, if, you know, unless it was absolutely necessary. And, you know, I love Napoleon had a saying that confidence is a factor of preparation. Yep. He was talking about war, you know, but the same sort of thing, the more prepared you are for combat, the better you're able to handle it and diffuse it and use dialogue and everything else. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of what you see, even in law enforcement, whether it's States or here, with maybe police shooting, you know, pups, as it were, or whatever suspect is, comes out of fear because they have nothing else to fall back on due to the lack of training necessary to control a really out of control physical person, you know, so they go to lethal force, and it's out of fear, and a lot of fights start that way. People lash out like caged animals because they have no real skill set. Is something about, and this is also what the idea of what we do with martial arts is, give a student confidence, you know, to know there are different avenues to handle aggressive and violent situations.
So I noticed you had a small chuckle when I mentioned John Belushi. I suppose the Blues Brothers and all the Belushi boys. Did you have much to do with them?
Yeah, no, I
worked out of control a little, or is that a bit apocryphal?
No, John. First of all, John was what? John, I just loved him. That actually started, Linda was doing Saturday Night Live, as you know, a legendary sort of show based in New York, and I was in the dressing room, and I would always limber her up, and same with all the artists, you know, stretch them out a little, getting ready for whatever their performance is. And John came in, saw me with Linda. That's kind of all it took. He asked, well, who's he? From that, I'm the only person he wanted to go with him on tour with the Blues Brothers and everything, which is interesting. So it's a little bit like, meaning my job is not somebody you send in a resume, you know. It's really somebody who knows somebody, and oh, well, if he's with that person, then he must be okay. So I ended up working with John on the Blues Brothers movie. I got to meet Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and all these incredible people. Yeah, John's got a heart of gold, but just extreme. You know, I said to John once, I said, what is it with you? I said, you're so smart, but you're like on the suicide mission, whether it came to food or cocaine is the drug of choice, especially then. It was just at the extreme, you know, and unfortunately, a lot of people like John, where it's a problem is people around that little capsule of people, in order to ingratiate themselves with someone like John, offer him drugs. Exactly. You know what I mean? And suddenly, but, you know, I would see, and again, I want to emphasize here, I'm not giving away any secrets because this is pretty well known. So I said, I'm not into divulge. I don't want to be the kiss and tell, butler 20 years later. But, you know, I'd see people come up and you used to get a gram of Coke, you know, a little vial. It would cost maybe $200. Normally you'd say, you want a bit of Coke, people would take a tiny little piece out. Well, John would empty the whole frigging vial into his fist, and down it would go. You'd see the person going, oh, fuck, that's my $200 gone. Yeah. But that was his life, you know, and but he was just a again, passionate person, artist,
lived
you know.
life to the excess.
Yeah, and enjoying every minute of it. You know, actually, my friend Bill Wallace, who's another world champion kickboxer, I ended up getting Bill the job working with John because I was committed to Linda and James and Fleetwood Mac at the time. I said, I can't continue out. So anyway, I got Bill to work. Bill was the one who found John at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, famous kind of bedding place for all the bands. We used to always stay there, and he was the one who found him and found John unconscious, gave him heart massage, everything, tried to revive him and couldn't, and it's a little bit of history right there.
So from the sublime to the ridiculous, I have a feeling, unless the perception is not quite this. ABBA, on the other hand, would be probably completely different.
Total contrast.
Yeah, they're probably straight, very talented, competent people, but
Yeah, no, and just again, beautiful people. I know that seems like a cliche, but they really were. You know, the girls, they wouldn't wear makeup off stage. There was so much lack of any pretension with them and everything else. You know, as you know, Molly Meldrum was one of the key people that basically got them out to Australia, which started an avalanche, you know, throughout the rest of the world. But I ended up training the girls. Tough gig, by the way, Sam. Somebody had to do it in their bikinis by swimming pools on the beach. I know. I had to grit my teeth, but I just, you know, being a martial artist, I just persevered.
Well, if I had my way of choice, I wouldn't mind you teaching me how to do a few of my tricks too. So I'm sure the girls didn't mind.
Allow me to be completely candid, Richard. If I had my choice, I'd like you to be looking after me too.
No, but ABBA were they were just the best, you know. And again, just regular people. You know, I often say to people that the best part of the job I did for like 20 plus years was that I got to actually know the real person, not the persona they put on stage. People always say, oh, what was David Bowie like? They always think you're going to talk about the weirdest person in the world, and they're not. They're just people that have found a niche. They understand how to sell it. They understand the press conferences they do, and how even, you know, I remember Mick Jagger saying to me once, you know, I said to him once after a press conference, I said, your accent isn't as strong or almost Cockney sounding as that. And he basically, I'm paraphrasing, he said, look, he said, how long have I been doing this? They still think they're going to interview me and trip me up with some weird question. He said, we just give them what they want. They want the sex, drugs and rock and roll persona. And he basically would feed that. Because there was a doco, you know, I watched on Stones not that long ago, and you hear him talk about his history. It's so tongue-in-cheek the way he refers to it and laughing about it. He understands so much of it's an act. But having said that, seeing the real person, you realize the one absolute through line of all those people is passion. They're absolutely passionate about what they do. Nobody has a career lasting as long as they do without being absolutely passionate. Like Lindsey Buckingham, you know, guitarist for Fleetwood Mac. Every tour bus we were on, I never saw him not fiddling with that guitar trying to find a real note. Or Linda Ronstadt, I remember one day sitting in the car and she was on the phone trying to find another voice coach. And this is years into her career. She was never content. She was trying to find a voice coach to help her hit a note slightly differently or whatever. And I thought, wow, they're the parallels with martial arts too. We're always a student. We're always trying to find something new to learn. How can I be a different martial artist to what I was a year ago? I want to express my art in a different way. And they're exactly the same. They're always just like chameleons, you know, trying to reinvent themselves.
And then I think you had a great relationship with Walker, Texas Ranger, Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris,
was that more than just a professional assignment or engagement?
You mean were we going out there?
Was he going out with him?
No, I'm just saying, no, not at all.
That would have been a tough relationship.
So I had. Do you mix socially with? I did sort of ask you that before. Do you mix socially with these people, or is it just business?
You worked on the Octagon, is that right?
Yeah, no, Octagon was my first movie, and that came. And Sam, you know Bob Jones, of course. Yes, Bob and I started Zendikar. Bob was the one who went to the States, met Chuck, brought him out to Australia in '78, and he was doing demonstrations at some of the very first ever kickboxing competitions in Australia, and I was also demonstrating like science or on the same card. Cut to, we just got on like a house on fire, I'd like to say, and Chuck said to me, if you ever get to California, look me up and we'll do some training, which for a little Croydon boy, you know, getting an offer like that from a legend like Chuck was like, oh my God. Not thinking I would ever get to the States. 79, a year later, Linda wants me to go and work for her there. First person I called when I got to the States with Chuck and started training with him every morning at his house. We would train 6 days a week for years. And that's what started my film career, because he knew I could handle weapons, wanted me to be his nemesis in the Octagon, one of his earlier action movies. I was like this ninja enforcer, and that's what started it all off. And Chuck, Judy and I just went stayed with Chuck 6 months ago. He's got a place in Hawaii, in Kauai. We stayed with him. We're still dear friends. He was best man at my wedding.
Really?
with
Well,
Judy.
it was a reasonable question when I said you have
Yeah.
an intimate relationship with Chuck.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, he's a different, and he helped me so much with my career in that he was so well respected in the martial arts world, so I got to beat and train with people that I would never have access to, normally speaking. So, yeah, he's been a great friend, and as
So
I
there would
said,
be
still is.
martial arts kind of expos and things. You would take part in all this too, where they would demonstrate the art, because Bruce Lee did this and Chuck Norris. So were you part of that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been teaching at Chuck. He has these called UFAF, or United Fighting Arts Federation. They've had seminars in Vegas each year since 1980, and I've taught almost each year since about 1983, and they've just asked me to go again in July. So that's where you get different martial arts from different systems that go and teach. I probably more specialize in reality-based self-defense, what I had to learn being on the road. Two martial artists that basically are school-trained, as it were, and you teach them to take those tools and hopefully give them a bit of a game plan should it ever become real.
So Wesley Snipes, I don't know why I've got his name written down. Is he a stunt? I know who Wesley Snipes is, but was he part of fight choreography? Did you train him or what?
No, I didn't. I had a good friend who was his stunt double, but Wesley's an actor, but also quite an accomplished martial artist as well.
Ah, that's what I was
thinking. And he really impressed me when I saw a couple of his early fight scenes, because he managed to put what we call traditional martial arts, which to a lot of the MMA world would say, well, traditional arts don't really work, they're pretty to watch and all of that. But I would argue someone like Wesley, the way he'd throw a side kick and everything else, I thought he was fantastic. And as you know, it's not the art, it's the individual, and how good is that particular person at what they do. And again, I didn't work with Wesley, but I did meet him, and he was lovely. He also nicely said, "Oh, I've watched so many of your movies, blah, 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 blah," which is nice.
Fantastic. So there was only one James Bond for me, that was Sean Connery, but that's because I saw the first one in 1960.
Me too.
61, I think. Yep. But you were on License to Kill, were you?
No,
Timothy Dalton.
It's funny. I don't know where that came from, Sam.
That's right. Comes off your bio.
I did not work on any of the Bond movies.
No, you didn't have anything to do with Timothy Dalton?
No.
Well, that's...
Yeah.
You can't trust the machine.
No, I know. I saw that once. I don't know where the hell that came from.
Now, I know I asked you this before, and maybe this is a thing that you... So Alec Baldwin, had a gun, he shot someone and they died, by mistake, of course, but... If you were on that set of that film Rustic and you were charged with training them and that, would that end up coming back to rebound on you? Or?
It wouldn't to me, because I would have nothing to do with the guns. That's an armourer's job. It's a very specific and obviously important position. And that was a fuck up in many areas, in that, normally speaking, if we're on the set, there's an armourer who hands the weapon to me. There's the armourer who will open whatever the weapon is and verify that it's empty. A third person has to also verify what I'm seeing is empty.
And blanks, the gun, the bullets?
Yeah, well, there's never ever a reason for live bullets on set, so that's also part of the court case, is why was there live ammunition? Yep. Apparently a lot of the cast were even having pot shots, with the weapons, whatever day on the set. Which
carelessness that could have been behind it?
Oh God, absolute carelessness. Plus, the AD was the one that handed the weapon to Alec, which is not acceptable. It's the armourer's job to do that. Yes, the AD can verify that the weapon is safe or cold or whatever it is, but it also, I don't want to give a judgment on this, but I would have thought someone like Alex, with his experience. I mean, that's the golden rule. You always treat the weapon as loaded. You would never point it. So obviously he has. Normally if I was going to shoot Sue on set,
thank you.
They would put the camera there. They would, all of that. But even the operator wouldn't be behind that screen. Nobody would be there. There are instances where you can point a weapon on you acknowledge, both of you've ascertained it's absolutely empty. There are situations. But nowadays they won't even have, even blanks are going to be absolute scarcity on set because they can do it in post anyway. They can give the flash and the sound and everything else. Some directors like blanks because it's a more realistic...
Visceral, yeah.
You know, yes, and the way the chambering of the gun and everything like that, but it's just not necessary. And of course it's changed the climate on sets now. Everybody's just being so much more careful.
Well, now, Richard, this has been a fascinating insight and to the world of fantasy that we live in when we go and watch all these things, and someone who's at the coalface, if I could use any more cliches than that, just who is the most, just the Dorothy Dixes to finish, who the most extravagant or out of control people or person you've worked with, or think they're a risk to themselves, or they've got to moderate their life, or what are something you could leave us with that? Who would you like to have minded or looked after that you didn't? I suppose. Well, they're not your era, but Michael Jackson, Elvis, Frank, all those people are gone. But who would you like to have been? Who do you admire?
Oh God, that's a hard question. Because again, I was fortunate enough to work with some of the top names in the business when I did. So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, again, to be around someone like an Aretha Franklin, which is a totally different era to the rock and roll, would have been amazing. But again, just because you see that passion in them, as far as out of control, no, I've been very fortunate. I would love to work with someone like a Denzel Washington. I just think he's amazing. Yeah, people like that.
Clint Eastwood, did you ever meet Clint Eastwood?
No, I didn't, but I worked with Jeffrey Lewis. Was an actor who you would know if you saw him because he was in a dozen Clint Eastwood movies. I trained his daughter Juliet Lewis when she did Natural Born Killers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Oliver Stone.
For a little bit at that. And but Jeffrey's very funny because he would say, he basically said every actor and crew person should do a movie with Clint Eastwood to know how a set should be run, because he's notorious for bringing films in under budget, under time. There's not even a chair. He says if you need a chair, then you're not working hard enough. He will do one or two takes and then he just moves on. And he told me a funny story. I think it was Wolfgang Peterson, the famous director, did a scene with Clint, and they shot the scene, and Wolfgang says to Clint, "Oh, Clint, that was fantastic. That was great. Okay, we'll just do one more." and Jeffrey said, Clint gets the Dirty Harry look and says, "Was I in focus?" And Wolfgang says, "Yeah," and Clint says, "That'll be fine." And that's it, and they move on. I thought, how good was that?
He made some of the simplest, Gran Torino,
great.
Mule,
Unforgiven,
Unforgiven, and I know I think he directed Sully.
Yep.
Which is
he's still directing now.
Yeah.
Right? He's like in his 90s. And he's still a great director.
I know.
He's producing quality work.
Yeah.
Hey, Richard Norton, this has been fantastic, and thank you, Sue, for getting Richard to come in. You're a star, mate, and we wish you well.
Thank you very
we'll
much.
keep following what you do, and thank you so much.
Oh, it's good. And, I'd like to say the good news is the journey continues. We've got some more movie roles coming up this year, no more bodyguard work. I'll give you a little insight as to why that stopped, by the way, because you'd understand this being guys. When I started, and Judy laughs because it's not a secret, but the big mistake, when you meet someone like Judy, she wanted to hear all the war stories on the road, of course, you get them all hot and bothered. Yep. Well, I said to her, I didn't think I was going to fucking marry you. Cut to getting married, I got offered a tour, and I said, "Oh, babe, they want me to..." That was it. She put the hammer down. No way. And I said, "No, but it's different." That was it. And she said, "Norton, if you think I'm going to believe your shit..."
That's why I call you the Mr. Nice Guy.
Exactly. So that was the end of it. But anyway, it's been a great journey, and it's still going.
You're a superstar.
Thankful for all of that. Yeah.
Good on you, mate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.